Welcome, everyone. My name is Troy McKenzie. It is my great privilege to be the Dean of NYU School of Law, and my privilege to welcome you to this celebration of the renaming of the center that henceforth will be known as the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Yes, applause. Let me begin with the obvious, and that is to extend my deepest thanks to Roger and Robin Meltzer for their significant and long-standing support of the center. I can say this in every possible way. Tonight would not be possible without the extraordinary efforts from Roger, Robin, the Meltzer family, and the incredible response from their network of colleagues and friends to fund this renaming. Roger, I know that when you and Trevor spoke about this many years ago, it was clear that you were in fact the right person to collaborate with on this extremely important effort, because your leadership and commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging made this possible. We are grateful for all you have done for the center, for the law school over the years, and all of that has made tonight a reality. I would also like to acknowledge and thank DLA Piper for their significant partnership with the center as well. The center's success is thanks to Roger's good friend, my colleague, the faculty director of the center, Kenji Yoshino, the executive director, David Glasgow, and assistant Shirley Dang for their tireless work over the years. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge my predecessor and friend, Trevor Morrison, who launched the center during his deanship and is a longtime supporter of the center's work. Finally, an enormous thank you to all the principal and founding donors who made gifts to the center to rename it in Roger's honor. Tonight is a treat because we have the privilege of hearing from Melissa Harris Perry, the Maya Angelou Presidential Chair at Wake Forest University, who is going to lead a conversation with Kenji, the Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor of Constitutional Law and the director of the Meltzer Center. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. Let me say a little bit about Professor Harris Perry and also about Professor Yoshino. As the Maya Angelou Presidential Chair, Professor Harris Perry teaches courses on American politics at the intersection of race, place, and gender. She also serves as host and managing editor of The Takeaway, the daily national public radio program and podcast distributed by WNYC and PRX. Professor Harris Perry is founder and president of the Anna Julia Cooper Center, whose mission is to advance justice through intersectional scholarship and action. And it is certainly a pleasure and privilege to welcome her to NYU Law. And she's going to be in conversation with Kenji Yoshino. Professor Yoshino specializes in constitutional law, anti-discrimination law, and law and literature. He is the author of major works including Covering, The Hidden Assault on Our Civil Rights, 1,000 Times More Fair, What Shakespeare's Plays Teach Us About Justice, and Speak Now, Marriage Equality on Trial. Kenji is a true thought leader in this field and in others, with publications in major academic journals, popular forums, and programs spanning from the Harvard Law Review to the New York Times to NPR. After this conversation, we'll have the pleasure of hearing from Roger, who serves as Chairman Emeritus of DLA Piper, and will be introduced by Frank W. Ryan, the Global Co-Chair and America's Chair at DLA. Let me talk a little bit about the Meltzer Center before I turn it over to the conversation between Kenji and Melissa. The Meltzer Center's mission aims to foster a sense of belonging in our institutions and societies for people of all backgrounds and supports our goals here at NYU. And those goals are to strive not only to live up to the values that the center represents, but also to share this expertise with external institutions within the profession and beyond. The center builds upon NYU Law's history as a preeminent leader on matters of diversity and inclusion. We were one of the first law schools to admit women in 1890 and to implement a non-discrimination policy on the basis of sexual orientation. And since its founding in 2016, the center has developed and rolled out a hugely successful, intense, year-long course titled Leadership, Diversity, and Inclusion that receives perfect or near perfect scores from students every year. That's not easy to do, I know. It is a unique class because it combines diversity and inclusion theory with practical lessons on skills necessary for success in the professional workplace, such as organization and time management, navigating difficult conversations, and writing and oral presentation skills. Based in part on this course, Professor Yoshino was the most recent law school recipient of this university's Distinguished Teaching Award, which is given to a very small number of faculty from across the university. The center also offers a student fellows program, directed research opportunities on the principle that students should not perform the work of diversity and inclusion without receiving financial compensation or academic credit. We are very proud of all of the ways in which the center continues to transform the landscape of diversity and inclusion within organizations through its work with a myriad of institutions. And I'll just give a few highlights. A digital training program developed by the center is now mandatory training across Microsoft's global workforce. Over 2,000 lawyers, including many in leadership positions, have participated in the inclusion training specifically customized by the Center for DLA Piper. The center also collaborated with the organization Black Theater United on a major initiative to make the Broadway theater industry more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. So as you will have seen, the center has made a significant impact as an educational hub, serving as the convener of a speaker series that has included U.S. Supreme Court justices, influential scholars, and leading figures in law and media. And I'd also like to add that the center will no doubt continue its rise with the forthcoming publication of the book, Say the Right Thing: How to Talk About Identity, Diversity, and Justice, which is co-authored by Kenji and David Glasgow. The book has already received much acclaim, with ACLU president and NYU law professor Deborah Archer calling it, quote, a critical tool for a challenging time, end quote. And the chief diversity officer of Microsoft, Lindsay Ray McIntyre, stating, anyone who wants to be a better ally will find Say the Right Thing a precious gift. So Kenji, I got the plugs in, and now we can proceed. So I'm really very excited to witness how the center will continue to innovate, to grow in the years to come, and I'm delighted that this new gift will support its mission and forever link Roger's name to this important work. Let me just add one final anecdote. I first got a chance to meet Roger several weeks back. We had a lovely meal, and the thing that struck me is that his contribution is not just financial or organizational. It is far deeper, far more meaningful. He gets it. So this is an appropriate, a wonderful moment for the center and for its work. So please join me in welcoming Melissa Harris Perry.
If we're going to do a plug, I feel like I should also show the... All right. If I am thinking, Kenji, about how I read the body of your work, from the teaching and the opportunity to sit in on your class today, to the work on covering, to your assessment that testimony is a space for surfacing the truth because of the capacity to take the time. It seems to me you have a profound and driving commitment to deliberative democracy, and perhaps even more to the deliberation than to the democracy. I mean, I'm sure the democracy, but to deliberation, to conversation as a tool, as an engine of change. So what I'm wondering is, in the 6 years that you have been building and leading this space, if your faith in deliberation as a tool and engine of change has been shaken at all.
Well, as I stall to answer that question, I want to begin by thanking my dean, Troy McKenzie, my former dean, Trevor Morrison, and my wonderful friends, Roger and Robin Meltzer. So I want to begin with that. It's truly an honor to be here with you, Melissa. We've known each other for over a decade now,
Yes.
so it's an honor to share the stage with you. So I want to say that maybe my faith in our capacity to have these conversations has been shaken, but my faith in conversation itself has not been shaken a whit, right? So I want to draw that really sharp distinction, that I still think that dialogue is something that is a reason why I moved into the diversity and inclusion field to begin with. So for those of you who don't know me, I cut my teeth as a civil rights scholar and a constitutional scholar, and came here because I was offered a chair I really couldn't refuse, the Chief Justice Earl Warren Professorship in Constitutional Law that sort of occupies the intersection of constitutional law and civil rights law. But as you know, Melissa, over time, I came to realize that civil rights law is incredibly important, right? But also had its limitations. And one of those limitations is that it can build a floor below which we can't fall. But over and above that is a ton of work that we need to do to build the cultures that would create the real execution of the values that I hold most dear surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to that end, I really think that conversations are the things that have most transformed me and have allowed me to transform others in the work that I do. So one of my main areas of focus is LGBT rights. In 2015, when Obergefell was decided, I was told by a colleague, you're out of a job. And I actually just felt, no, actually my job is just beginning, because that just sets the baseline, as in so many other areas, for all the progress that needs to come. In a way, I think the law is going to be inadequate always. It's not just a question of we need to perfect the law in order to execute on those values. It's that the law is never going to be able to catch up, because the law is just a meat axe. And these interactions that we have with each other are so infinite and infinitesimal that the law is never going to be and should never be able to reach them all. And so when I think about what fills in the gap that is left by the law, which itself, of course, is a form of conversation. But when I think about what could actually build above the law, it is these individual conversations that can meet these concerns exactly where they lie, which is at the interhuman level of dialogue. So we talked earlier in class about how Melissa said that she was an optimist and petty. Right, yes. And I said, I'm neither. So I want to hear more about the petty, because I've never detected that in you. I said that I was neither an optimist, but a pessimist. But I hope that I was a realist, right? So the realist in me thinks that we have a long way to go. These conversations become ever more difficult. But one of the reasons why David and I wrote this book is to try and help people have them just a little bit more frequently and a little bit better.
Well, we can figure out if you're an optimist, pessimist, or realist, but it is clear from this text, having read it, I was like, oh, I forgot, Kenji's not petty. So you don't even indulge in the marginal footnote of yeah, whatever. I mean, I just couldn't. I'm not even sure the level of just sort of humility and openness that I think is part of the reason that we have an ongoing friendship, because you always teach me something without making me feel like I'm in class, right? So it's a way of being engaged in that conversation. But there are a lot of things that obtain in a conversation between you and I. We begin with goodwill. We have opportunities for iteration. This isn't the first time we've talked, and we can mess up a little bit and then talk again. we speak the same language in so many different ways that you could define language, right? Both being scholars, and we are in a relatively similar power situation. You now have a really great endowment, and so you're better than me. But other than that, we're in a really close situation of power. Many conversations that need to happen around DEI don't obtain in that way. People don't speak the same language. There is a power differential. There's not necessarily goodwill, or there won't be opportunities for iterated interactions. How does that affect the capacity to do this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me actually break it into 2 parts. So the first part is really, you don't always need to stay in conversation with people. Like, one of the most revelatory things that I read was our Stern colleague at NYU, Dolly Chug's book, The Person You Mean to Be. And Dolly, I don't know if you know her, but she's one of the most humane, generous people I know. But she says something quite stern in this book, which is to say D&I, like all other change, has a 20-60-20 rule, where 20% of people are like the people in this room who care passionately about diversity and inclusion, right? 60% are in the movable middle, and then 20% are ineradicably and ideologically opposed, right, to any D&I effort. And so you would expect someone like Dolly Chug to say, oh, and those are the people you should embrace. And instead what she says is, be really careful before you put someone in the bucket of the stuck 20, as she calls them. But once you put them in that bucket, just forget about them, right, she says. Like, write them off, don't keep beating your head against a wall, because all of those energies are much better devoted to the middle 60, right, who are actually movable to your side. So the first thing that I would say is, there's nothing in this book that says you have to have a conversation or that you can't walk away from a conversation, right? All that said, though, if somebody is not in that stuck 20%, if they're not engaged in egregious behavior, if they have some willingness to learn, we actually say that it's particularly important. This is actually, in some ways, the most revolutionary part of this book, is that you need to be an ally not just to the affected people who have been harmed, but also to the sources of non-inclusive behavior. And when people say, why on earth should I expend any energy on that source? So assuming that they're not in the stuck 20, we say you should, because someday that will be you. So that we do not have the privilege of sitting in the allyship chair at all times. This is a game of musical chairs. So if we think about it as a triangle, there are 3 parties in every allyship situation. There's the ally, all of us. There's the affected person, the person who's been harmed. And then there's a source of non-inclusive behavior. So one of the things that I find so helpful is to just think about this as not a question of whether I will become the source of non-inclusive behavior, but when I will become the source of non-inclusive behavior. And when I look at allyship from that perspective, it allows me to be a lot more empathetic, right? So I think that takes care of a lot of the who should I draw close, who should I call in, and who should I call out, to use Loretta Ross's language. I think the last piece of it is really this notion of power differentials. And David and I thought long and hard about this, because we have, as you and I do, all kinds of privilege in our jobs. It's a mystery, as it is to many in the room, of, when did we become the establishment, right? I still think of myself as like the scrappy young activist, right? And from my students' perspective, I'm certainly not young, and it's doubtful that I'm an activist, right, anymore on these issues, right? So we wrote this book not to sort of finger wag at people who are, the affected people, but rather to speak to the allies. Because I think one thing that's exciting about this particular moment, this really goes back to your first question, is that the great awakening, to use Matt Iglesias' phrase, has happened, where white people are going to Black Lives Matter protests, men are going to the Women's March on Washington, cisgender and heterosexual people are being allies to the LGBT community. So the one thing that I find really hopeful about this moment is that the more powerful people in the exchange demographically are actually reaching out and saying, how can I do better to live up to my own values? So it's really to that audience of people who are more powerful to say, if you could just change, even if it's by, at the margins, the way in which you have these conversations about identity and diversity with the people who you touch in your life, that effect could be transformative. That's what feels different to me about this particular historical moment as compared to even 10 years ago.
It's interesting, as you were talking about the 20-60-20. thinking, oh, that's an awful lot also, since we're in midterm election season, right? Especially during a midterm, please do not spend your time sending your flyers to durable partisans of the other party, right? That is a waste of your time. They're not coming. And in fact, actually, I think most in a midterm would recognize also sort of ignore the 60. Really, your job is to get the 20 who are with you to show up, right? That's just a little, if anybody's running campaigns, just, oh, New York. I bring up the midterms and I bring up real politics because right now, in this moment, in the city of Los Angeles, this question of discourse, of power, and with what feels like a non-obvious who is in control here, who has the power here, right? This is, surely you're all following it, right? So this discourse that we could easily turn into a black-brown sort of in their own corners, but which actually has turned instead into a sort of the empowered using their power for their own purposes. And you don't have to weigh in on the actual, what do they call it, the kerfuffle that is in this moment. But it did feel, I was reading this while I was reporting on that and thinking, how does this help us in that moment to understand where power is, where racism is, where anti-blackness is, where self-interest is, who is the ally in this story, and what is the outcome that we're going for?
Yeah, so wonderful. So, I would actually start by saying that, first of all, there's no silver bullet, right? So that if we had a silver bullet, we would have used it a long time ago. So this book does not purport to be a panacea for every...
You do not have the solution to all things. Come on.
But in terms of what we are able to do in the book, I think that the most important thing that we lay out are things that, in some sense, we should already all know how to do already, but they pertain to building resilience and cultivating curiosity, right? So if we have these, heated debates about identity politics, the fact that we don't immediately, take, an allegation that we might have engaged in a microaggression or slipped up in some way to be an existential threat, So again, I think one of the things that worries me about this context is that people have very, very little resilience. And then that resilience leads them to have very little curiosity. So one of the things that I would love to see in the current sort of New York discourse is what Christy Dodson calls a nuclear physics seminar, hypothetical, where she says, one of the things that's most dangerous about conversations about identity is that we assume that we know what the other person is talking about. We assume that if they've read the book, they've read the same book as we've been reading, to riff off of something that you said in my class. And what she says is we need a posture of humility, not just for what we don't know, but for what we don't know that we don't know, right? Because when we don't know something, everyone in this room is very capable of going out and learning that. But if you have the kind of gap in knowledge where you're unconscious of your own ignorance, then that becomes much harder to fill. So how do you even begin, given that definition, you don't know what you don't know, to fill that gap? And she has this wonderful hypothetical about the nuclear physics seminar. So given this crowd, it's going to be just my luck that you're all nuclear physicists in some past life. But if you are, then think of some other arcane body of knowledge that intimidates you. And for the rest of us, it's nuclear physics, where she says, you're in a nuclear physics seminar. If someone is lecturing to you, you actually hold a very different posture than I think anyone in these debates currently in the city is having, right? Which is to say, I really am not sure that I understand this, right? And a genuine posture of humility, right? So the notion would be, if you're listening to a nuclear physics seminar, you're going to listen attentively and share tentatively, right? So you're going to listen attentively and say, I think I understood that, but I'm not sure. I'm going to kick the tires on it. I'm going to flip a lot of my statements into questions, right? And then sharing tentatively, if I have an opinion to offer, then I'm going to offer it in a much more careful way than I otherwise would. So, I think that that's sort of the beginning of how I would frame it in terms of having these conversations go a little bit better. I think the final thing that I would say on this is that we have a whole chapter on disagreements that was actually spawned by one of our students. who came up to us after one of these talks and said, I vehemently disagreed, right, with a claim that was made during this speech that, my remarks were sexist in nature, but I didn't feel like I could disagree. Am I allowed to disagree? And David and I were like, of course you're allowed to disagree. That would be ridiculous, especially if you're at an academic institution, but even if you're not, right? I think too often in these conversations about D&I, there seem to be two options, right? Either like wholesale agreement or like you disagree and then you apologize, right? And there has to be a stable place where you can disagree. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what we would want that respectful disagreement would look like. And I won't go into it chapter and verse unless it's of interest, but the one thing that I thought was genius, and here I have to credit my wonderful co-author David Glasgow for coming up with this, is a kind of controversy scale where we often don't know what we're disagreeing about, right? So if we're disagreeing about tastes, like whether chocolate or vanilla ice cream is better, or who has a better sports team, or the better Netflix series, right? Then we can actually become closer through those disagreements, right? We can just trash talk each other's Netflix shows, and that will bring us closer rather than further apart. And then if we move one step over, David says, we're disagreeing about facts. So as long as these are not contests of our values by proxy, like alternative facts or what have you, but are genuinely like who, what, when, where journalistic facts, then it's going to be hotter, but not nearly as hot as it could be. And then when we shift over to policies, a little bit hotter, we see the New York City kind of analogs here. Then if we shift over to values, and then if we shift over to equal humanity, that's going to be the hottest of all. And what David says is, we often talk past each other in these disagreements is that we locate ourselves in the wrong places. So I could be having a conversation about race in schools and affirmative action, and I could be arguing that simply as a matter of policy without understanding that on the other side that's going to land as an issue of equal humanity. That doesn't mean that I have to go to the other person's side and see it from exactly the same place they're seeing it, but it does at a minimum mean that I need to acknowledge that, to say, and I can even raise that during the conversation itself and say something along the lines of, I'm articulating this and arguing this as a matter of policy, but I realize that for you it could land as a matter of your equal humanity, so I'm going to try to be mindful and respectful of that as we have the conversation. So nothing is surrendered here, right? You don't have to change your position on anything. You just have to have the empathy to acknowledge where the other person is, and that's what I think is in short supply now.
Well, I continue to use the language of ally. It's fallen out of favor in a lot of spaces, and also I often have found it irritating. I'm happy to be an ally. I'm happy to have allies. There are many times an ally, I don't know if anybody is a gamer, if you play Mario, you can actually get an ally in the game. No one else has an 8-year-old. Okay, so I have an 8-year-old, so there's often the playing of Mario, and you can, in addition to all the other things you can get, like cookies and prizes, you can get an ally, which I think is so cool. And then your ally has a different die roll. I think it's actually very DEI. It's fascinating. So I'm not against ally, but both because discursively it occupies a particular position, and because I guess, again, as a political scientist, I worry a bit about the ways that allyship obscures power. So sometimes I want to understand the other side. Sometimes I want to beat the other side. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have to think of wanting to beat the other side as anything other than my opponent, right? I don't have to think of them as evil, as my enemy. But sometimes they are my opponent, and we can't both win. Right. Not necessarily in a conversation, but in law, in policy, in an election. Why is ally a valuable framework?
Yeah, so I think there again, there's a kind of threshold issue of, and I actually quote you on this from an interview you gave long ago, where you said, oftentimes I have to debate whether or not I'm going to empathize or whether I'm going to smite. Right, mm-hmm. and I think that is the dilemma.
I'm an old black Southern lady. There's a lot of smiting, yes.
That all of us have, and I think that what initially drew me to the law, frankly, mm-hmm. was its capacity to smite, and I thought of myself as a smiter, right? And increasingly, after the Dobbs decision, and the sequels that it might have with regard to the sanctity of my own marriage and the legality of my own marriage, I think I might be in smite mode fairly soon, right? On constitutional law or civil rights law grounds, right? But I think that there is also, and I think we have to be able to do both and, right? An opportunity to empathize where we need to empathize, right? And so that's this is sort of threshold issue of I have the same dilemma. It's just that I see a huge field, right, where we don't do enough, empathizing, and we have to make that initial decision to empathize rather than to smite, whereas I think some of us are permanently in smite mode. So with regard to that field of empathy, why use the term ally? And when I think about this, I always think about sort of compared to what, right? And maybe you have answers that I haven't thought of. You usually do, Melissa. But the alternatives that we found when we searched, for this were things like, oh, I'm a co-conspirator, right? Or I'm an accomplice, which, suggested a deeper sense of complicity with the other individual. I don't think I need to tell anyone, at this law school that those are unattractive options for us. Like, I don't
There was so much shifting in the sequence. Oh, no, yes.
But I think that when we looked at the real kind of gut, and then, I'd love to draw you out on what your objection to ally is, it just seemed a little bit like tepid, right? That, even at the university, they've replaced Ally Week with Solidarity Week, because ally still suggests you're kind of on the outside looking in. But David and I thought about this really hard, and we thought, like, this is kind of a mend it, don't end it kind of situation, where a lot of the complaints that are made about allyship are really complaints about what we think of as poor forms of allyship, rather than something endemic to allyship itself. So what is it that we don't like about allyship? We often don't like it when allyship is performative, right? So if somebody is motivated by the desire to think about your 8-year-old's cookies, to engage in cookie-seeking behavior of like, I want a pat on the back, or I want some affirmative reward for this, or if they're engaging in sort of virtue signaling, trying to show everybody in the world how great they are, those are motivational issues. There are also informational ones. Are you informed enough to act, right? Where oftentimes people sort of flex and say, I'm an ally. They tick a box without actually knowing anything about either what happened between the other two parties, or without actually knowing anything about the demographic that they're seeking to be an ally to, right? But all of these issues are things that I think are solvable internal to the term ally, which we did sort of word counts, and relative to other words that were similar, like even solidarity, but also accomplice and co-conspirator, ally was the most well understood. And I think it was a word of the year in dictionary.com last year. And so there is some kind of currency to the word that we wanted to leverage. But could I actually flip that and ask you what your objections, have I covered your objections to the word ally, or is it something deeper than that?
I think your the tepidness is where you are, and I think for me again it's a power question. What I suppose I'm most interested. Well, so there's two things. One is about who's centered, and the second is about the question of sort of tepidness. And so, the Obama-Biden White House had a campus sexual assault program called It's on Us. It was like their and it was sort of this bystander perspective, right? So the it's on us means it's on all of us to address campus sexual assault. And I said, I don't know why this keeps coming up tonight, it's very weird, but so I'm a sexual assault survivor, and I was like, I spent, a good 20 years in therapy saying it's not on me. So now you've made a t-shirt that I can't wear, is the way to think about it, right? Like, I can't, as an assault survivor, wear the it's on us, because I actually spent time deciding and working through that it wasn't on me. So it's presuming, right, that the power, right, and it presumes that this is primarily about bystander capacity as opposed to predatory action, right? So I'm like, well, no, I think it's on him. And I want an approach that addresses the predatory, right? Which is where I then go on the tepidness, which is, I am interested in how you will use your privilege to work for others. I'm interested in how you will give from your overage to assist. I'm interested in how you will use your savings account of goodwill and of power. But I am more interested in what you will sacrifice. And I am more moved by those who are prepared to lose something they have, really lose something they have, really threaten their own well-being to do this work. And ally doesn't get there. And I don't know that there is a word that gets there, but it is that I'm, even if we're not all there all the time, Because if you ask me what I'm willing to lose for everybody in the room, I don't know. But it is, I suppose, the Ukrainian people taking up arms. And I have had to ask myself a lot, if Winston-Salem, which is where I live, my town that I love, my community that I love, if the robber comes to the house, if the person invades my house, I know what I'm willing to lose for my family. What would I do if an invasion? I'm not sure I'd do anything for y'all. No, I'd help out New York, but what would I do for Winston-Salem? I don't know. It was quite astonishing to watch. We know that this has happened in other places. We know it happened in Afghanistan. We know it happened in Syria, but we've been given access to seeing it happen in Ukraine, and it has. So I want to know what we're willing to lose, what we're willing to sacrifice on behalf of this work, rather than just the plenty out of which we are willing to give.
Good, beautifully put. Yeah, so I don't want to start there, because when we are actually talking about, sexual assault survivors, like, I'm actually not in empathize mode, I'm in smite mode, right? So that's actually beyond the kind of purview of the book to begin with.
For sure.
But I want to start with the very small acts, right, that create the kinds of habits of the heart that allow us to ramp up. So one of the reasons why Roger and I are so like-minded is that we're fundamental realists, and where we began, right, was with this notion of these paradigms of D&I have to work for everybody, right? So let's begin there, right? So if they have to work for everybody, how do you convince somebody who's like, I don't belong to any of the major minority demographic characteristics that the United States recognizes? It's increasingly few of us now that those categories have become more expansive, but I don't really see what's in it for me. How do we get that person into the conversation, right? And the way Roger and I thought about drawing these people into the conversation was to say, well, all of those individuals are terrified that they're going to be the sources of non-inclusive behavior, that they're going to say the wrong thing. And it could be very other regarding. It could be, I'm going to hurt somebody that I really care about. But it could also be very self-regarding in the sense of, I'm going to get canceled or I'm going to get ostracized from my community, right? So if we start with that person, what we need to do is to have the ally there who is going to be an ally both to the affected person, but also to the source of non-inclusive behavior, right? So I think the most revolutionary aspect of this book is that it asks us to hit the pause on cancel culture, and to at least within an organization, and at least with regard to this 80% rather than the malicious 20%, and then to approach those sources of non-inclusive behavior with the understanding that someday that's going to be us. Right, so that sounds very, very daily. Me saying I'm actually going to acknowledge that I have been the source of non-inclusive behavior in the past. I realized that I was calling on men more than I was calling on women. That in my constitutional law class, I was mortified as a putative, aspiring male ally to women, including my female colleagues and my students, right? But what did I do there? I didn't sort of just berate myself. I didn't say, I'm going to engage in performative allyship. I said there needs to be a systemic fix here, because no matter how many times I try to get better, I can't seem to dig myself out of this hole of being the source of non-inclusive behavior, because for 3 or 4 classes I would do better, and then in the 5th class I would get tired or stressed or excited about the material, a positive emotion, right? And I would be back to my old habits. Fighting unconscious bias, we now understand, is like stretching a rubber band. So that when the rubber band is stretched, we can engage in unbiased behavior. But the minute we let go of that rubber band, it snaps back into place. So what I devised with my assistant, Corey Conley, is a more systemic solution of saying, we're going to put a system in place that keeps the rubber band in place. So I'm going to hand you my class list, and you are going to randomize it before every class and hand it to me as I walk in, because no matter how tired or stressed or excited about the material I am, then I can call down a list. So what I'm trying to say here is that we're talking about something that occurs on a very small scale, and it might seem like going from the horrendous to the kind of tiny, right, and trivial in order to for me to scale it in that way. But I really want to say that for me, allyship begins in a much more modest way that doesn't say, I need to ask you what you're going to sacrifice for the greater good, but rather, can you make a slight tweak in your behavior in the name of creating a more inclusive environment that will vastly improve the lives of the individuals around you, with the understanding that those individuals will show you the same grace, not, in the case that not whether, but when you make a mistake yourself, whether you're going to be knocking on my door saying, that wasn't great, but, I did something very similar a year ago, and can I be your ally so that, we can grow past this mistake together. So for me, it's really that starting point of, again, the infinite and the infinitesimal, acts of allyship that we can exercise towards each other. And I've yet to meet a person, Melissa, who goes from that starting point and stays there,
Yeah.
right? That is the starting point that leads to much greater, engagement, that leads to much greater empathy, and ultimately much greater sacrifices. So if you're going to ask a person to make a sacrifice, I don't think the way to lead off is to say, please make that sacrifice for me right now without knowing me from a bar of soap. I think it is like, let me actually ask you to tweak small things around the margins of your behavior, and I think that you will see that this is a better way to live, right? When Loretta Ross came to our center just a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that she said that I really loved was, she said, one of the things about diversity and inclusion, one of the things about activism that we all should realize is that it's incredibly fun, right? That ours is the fun side of the equation. The people who are evil, right, are not having fun, right? The people who are good should actually enjoy, right, the fact that to do good is to feel good, right? And so, that's really what David and I are wagering everything on, is that these smaller habits are the place to build, right, those larger contributions and sacrifices.
I think you underestimate the joys of Petty Corner. Pinky and the Brain. It can be a fun place. I know we're at time, but I have one last one, because part of what I hear you saying is, what I'm reading into what you're saying here is an expanded or maybe changed definition, and one that I really appreciate, around the notion of safe spaces. So I have regularly battled against the notion of safe space, just in this sense. I don't want my classroom in particular to be safe for your brain. I want it to be safe for your humanity. I don't want you to leave in any way physically, emotionally, spiritually harmed. But I do kind of want you to leave a little intellectually harmed. I want you to leave like your brain maybe running out a little bit from your ear, from all of the things that you've encountered that are confusing, or maybe upsetting, are pushing you to think about something in a different way. And every time I've made change, every time I've been a better ally or co-conspirator or a little bit less petty in my human interactions, it hasn't been in a safe space. It was somebody being like, no, do better, push yourself, or read this, or talk to me about how we use the challenges of scholarship, the challenges of academic inquiry, to make the world safer in this much broader sense.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for that, and also a really great place to end. So, I also don't love the framing of safe spaces, and I often have heard it contrasted to kind of brave spaces, and we need to be brave. That in itself has become, I think, a form of cliche. If I were to aspire to something, I would aspire for resilient spaces, like spaces in which we can be resilient and other people support our own resilience. So, I think I'm a slightly less hardcore than you, in the sense that I also believe in discomfort, but I believe that in the same way that there's an optimal level of anxiety, there's an optimal level of discomfort, right, beyond which, we don't want to travel, right? So I don't want my students to be in distress. I actually don't want them to be, bleeding out of their ears as they leave the classroom. But I do want them to challenge themselves, right, and to be uncomfortable, and to ask themselves not so much, right, why am I so uncomfortable in this classroom, but rather, why have I been so comfortable until now, which is, I think, one of the things that you're driving at. And I certainly have had my biggest sort of epiphanies and advances when I'm in that optimal level of anxiety. I think just from knowing you and from having just had this class together where you discussed it, one of the things that both of us are really blessed to have, right, is an ecosystem of people who support us, right? Yep. And so one of the things that we talk about, in our work is the importance of, when you're trying to be an ally for D&I, not going it alone. So every single person in this room knows, right, that when you're trying to be an ally, you're not allowed to seek help from the person that is the affected party, right? So you're not allowed to go to someone and say, I really want to be your ally, right, on these gender issues, but I need you to give me a reading list, so that I can study up on the feminist canon, right? Yeah. Or if I'm trying to be, a non-black ally in the post-BLM movement, right, I'm not allowed to kind of burst into tears, right, as the ally and divert all of the emotional energy, right, away from the affected person towards me. So we all know that. But I think that from that true premise, we reach a false conclusion, which is that because I'm not allowed to seek help from the affected person, I'm not allowed to seek help at all. And the critical point here is that allies need allies, which is one of the reasons why we're gathered here today. And my favorite model for this is the psychologist Susan Silk's ring theory model, which comes actually not from her psychological research, but from her own experience with breast cancer. So she's a psychologist, she has breast cancer, she's in the hospital, and then her best friend calls her up and says, I'm so concerned about you, I'm coming over to visit you right away. And Silk said, I'm so touched, by your support, it means so much to me, but I don't really like hospital visits. So can you wait until I'm released from the hospital, and then I'd love to see you. And then Silk's friend says, who remains unnamed for reasons that you'll quickly discover, this isn't all about you, Susan, the friend says. I'm concerned about you, and I have the right to visit you.
Yeah.
Right? At which point Silk's response was, I have breast cancer, and this isn't about me, it's somehow about you, right? And then later on, to her immense credit, I think I might fail the petty test too, because I never would have gone there.
She created the whole...
She created, the whole model where she said, I am actually going to make some work out of this, because it is true that the friend should not have sought support from me because she was the ally in that situation and I was the affected person. But it is not true that she's not entitled to some form of support for the distress that I, as her friend, know that she was feeling. It's just that she sought it from the wrong person. So ring theory is map out concentric circles. I encourage everybody in this room to do this, right, at some point when they're confronting an allyship situation. Put the affected person at the epicenter of the crisis, right? Put yourself one circle out as the ally, but then keep drawing circles. So draw, a circle with your family and friends. So my husband Ron is here with me now. I have many friends in the room. And they would populate one circle out for me as an ally. And then I can go even further out and think about sort of friendly, colleagues who I might lean on. And the cardinal rule of ring theory is comfort in, dump out, right? So I can only direct, when I'm looking inward, comfort, right, inward. But if I need to dump out, I need to dump outward to people who are less close to the epicenter of the crisis. And this has proven to be extraordinarily helpful, right, with regard to this notion of, what is a safe space, what is an uncomfortable space, how do you achieve the optimal level of discomfort? Because I want to sit and learn from you, as I did today in our classroom, right? And I want you to make me uncomfortable, right? But I also want to know that at a point where, that discomfort leads to a certain level of distress, right? That I can actually go, home to Ron, right, and dump out to him, right, and say to him, like, I really need to talk to you about something that Melissa said to me that I can't stop thinking about. That's really nagging at me, and I really need to articulate this, right? Yeah. So the point in an allyship situation, this is not exactly a DNI situation, right? But if you were the affected person, I was trying to be your ally. I think that the mistake that I make is I am uncomfortable. One mistake I can make is I'm uncomfortable and therefore I need to run back to my comfort, and that's not what I'm advising. I want us to be resilient. I want us to be there as allies for affected parties. But I also think that it is false to say that simply because I can't go to another individual, the affected person, for help, that I have to be a superhero and that I can't seek help from anybody whatsoever, right? And so I hope that one of the things that we're doing on this momentous occasion of naming the center after the Meltzer family, right, is to make sure that we remember where we are tonight and we all think of ourselves as being somewhere in each other's ring theory. So with that, I'll thank you so much for your friendship over the years.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if you could see, but I was a little delayed in getting up from my chair, and Roger was telling me, move it, fella. This is kind of how our relationship has gone for most of our lives. Let me start off by thanking you, Dean McKinsey, and the NYU School of Law for hosting this fantastic evening tonight. You brought together thought leaders to discuss the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the legal profession, and our institution has been an immense beneficiary of this, so I want to thank you. I want to thank Professor Harris Perry and Professor Yoshino for your insightful conversation today. Kenji, from our firm, you have done so much to help us, so I want to thank you personally. And Professor Harris Perry, my wife is a big fan. Her name is Melissa as well, and she wants to meet you. So we'll make that happen. We'll make that happen later on. Most importantly for me, it is my great pleasure to be here tonight to introduce my friend, my mentor, and I'll put in quotes, former boss. I don't think it's ever former. Chairman Emeritus of DLA Piper and trustee of the NYU School of Law, Roger Meltzer. Now, Roger's distinctions as a lawyer are numerous. For more than 40 years, he practiced corporate and securities law, representing some of the world's top corporations and top corporations, banking firms, commercial banks, private equity, and investment funds. He has been named to the National Law Journal's list of equity trailblazers and is one of the top 10 legal innovators of the year by the Financial Times, as well as being recognized as a distinguished leader by the New York Law Journal. He's done far more than that, far, far more than that. The number of partners from DLA, friends who know Roger here tonight to support him and Robin and their incredible family. Now, while these accolades are impressive, and they are, and what he's done as a practitioner, as a leader are impressive, I suspect that no honor that he has received to date compares to the rewarding and meaningful recognition of having the center named after his family and the work that he has done to make this happen. The Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging really is a testament to Roger's leadership, and I know something about that. As a leader, especially of a law firm, a global law firm like DLA, the challenges come to you frequently. Roger tried to explain this to me in detail. I didn't quite listen to all of it. There are challenges that the leader seeks, and there are challenges that come just by virtue of the job. You're often dealt with unexpected challenges. You're dealt with unavoidable challenges. And your job in the role, which Roger did so well, was to make the firm, the organization, better as a consequence of going through this stressful period of time, to make it more resilient, to make it less fragile. He did this incredibly well. He helped take the firm from really what was a global legal startup to an incredibly important member of the law firm professional world, one of the leaders in the profession, in fact. He brought the law firm through a cyber attack. We had personnel issues, as you might imagine, we had to deal with. The COVID pandemic. After each one of those, DLA got stronger as a result, and that was because of Roger's leadership. But those are the challenges that came to him by virtue of that role, of that job. Then there are the challenges that a leader seeks. They're the ones where you see an opportunity to make things better, and you use your time, you use your resources, and you use your platform to make that happen. A leader doesn't have to do that. There's certainly enough of a day job for that person. Roger did this. Roger got people talking about inclusion in law firms. He got people talking about recruiting top talent from a wider pool of candidates, about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to have meaningful training and development. And he found an incredible partner in this front row to do this with. Today, unlike 2016, today, diversity and inclusion and belonging are top of mind for law schools, for law firms, and for our clients. Roger's impact in this area will be his legacy, no question about it. For the countless lawyers who come after us, who will have an opportunity to build a successful career because he helped bring into sharp focus the need to make people feel welcomed in the profession and supported in the profession and to be given a true chance to succeed, and that is his legacy. Roger epitomizes a quotation from one of his favorite writers, the New York Times columnist David Brooks. Almost every successful person begins with two beliefs. The future can be better than the present, and I have the power to make it so. DLA and its partners are incredibly proud of him and are thankful and grateful for him and for Robin and for their family. And we are so proud to support the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And I'd please ask you all join me in welcoming Roger Meltzer to the stage.
Wow, this is more than even I could have anticipated. So before I start to talk about seriously, is there anybody from Philadelphia in this room? There's somebody from Philadelphia in this room. You guys, between the Phillies and the Eagles, are obviously living in an alternative reality right now. Are there any Met fans in this room? Okay, not so much an alternative reality, but there's plenty, Troy, there's plenty of money there, and it'll be fine. So, my brothers, if, God damn it, you guys, if you're looking at your phone to see what the Yankee score is, I'm gonna kill you guys. I'm gonna kill you guys later. So Robin said to me this morning, are you anxious about this at all? And I said, you know, to tell you the truth, I'm more anxious about Game 5. So with that kind of sort of feeling about it and feeling about, obviously, Kenji, I want to obviously thank all of you for joining us tonight to honor really what is the center's work. You each, and believe me, there were plenty of people who called me today and said, oh my God, I got a ticket for Game 5, what am I going to do? I said, well, you can make a gift to the center and I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you. It goes to the endowment. And Kenji, David, and I so appreciate your effort to be here, as does Troy and David and Trevor. Obviously, Melissa, thank you so much for coming. You know, it is not anybody who actually will sit on the stage and actually question Kenji. He is usually the guy who's asking the questions. And I remember well his interview of Justice Ginsburg, which Trevor will remember well, where there was a whole conversation about Justice Ginsburg saying that Trevor was her favorite clerk or something like that. And she said to him, look, you could have it forever. He said, I didn't know that. I would have taken that job instead of this job. So thanks again for everybody being here. Very often the thanks are sort of at the end and really end up being an afterthought, but in my mind, they're sort of uppermost in my mind. Obviously, to the donors, many of whom are my longtime friends and colleagues, I couldn't have done this without you. The center and Kenji and David's work is so seminally important that I think people, even people that may be actually in the 20% bucket, and I had some of those, definitely, in my conversations, were willing to take a chance. And they thought that they were taking a chance. The development office, Nick and others, have said wryly from time to time that I am among their fiercest fundraisers. I think those that know me very well are not completely shocked by that. But honestly, if you have embarked on any kind of journey like this, it never gets accomplished in the way that this had to get accomplished without constant and persistent follow-up in making Kenji and David's and the law school's vision a real reality. To my family, obviously, Robin, my brothers, John and Don, and my sisters-in-law, Amy and Shelley, my kids, Justin, Lizzie, and Paul, Martin and Pam, and of course, many of whom believe she is the MVP, Tiffany. No one who knows her doesn't love her, and no one more than I do. Obviously, a special thanks to DLA Piper and Frank, certainly for their financial support, but honestly, more importantly, for allowing me to utilize the firm as a laboratory. And when, I guess it was Kenji was talking about the 2,000 lawyers, or Troy was maybe talking about the 2,000 lawyers, that were our lawyers, all over the country and in some places outside of the US. And what the firm as a laboratory allowed us to do, given its size and scope, and I think Kenji and David would both say this, it allowed us and allowed them to validate and prove out theories of the work, and also its scalability. beyond the law, along with, as many of you know who are NYUers, this sort of bespoke approach to teaching people about what they are really saying and how it's affecting them. Of course, lawyers being lawyers, without the evidence and the social scientific part of it interwoven with it, you know, you lost the lawyers in a very early part of it. But it promoted in the firm, and I think what Frank was saying is exactly right. It was a startup in 2007 when I arrived there, and it had to have cultural change. And the cultural change that DLA was able to evince and ultimately bring forward put the brand and put our thinking so far ahead of the rest of big law, it ended up infecting, in the best possible way, large service organizations to make the cultural change that they so desperately needed. Trevor. So the reason I used to go to the board meetings, David, forgive me for this, was because you got CLE credit. That was the reason I really went. So at one of these board meetings, Kenji spoke. And I also went because I couldn't imagine that somebody who looked like they were 16 years old could be the dean of the law school, but that's how I felt about Trevor and also. And Kenji, Trevor, I said to Trevor after that meeting, I said, I got to meet this guy. This is gonna be something really special. But to Trevor's credit, he understood that complacency in the law and in firms, particularly big law, was rampant. Everything was old and tired. There was no innovation. And he also understood, which is one of my maybe petty peeves, but not so petty, is that the academy couldn't do it alone. And so he knew in his heart of hearts that social change in the profession and big law on the level that we aspired to required a partnership between hardcore driving personalities who won't take no for an answer and the academy. I have publicly said for a long time, sometimes to the consternation of this law school, that there is often a material disconnect between the practice and the academy. Bridging the gap in the areas of allyship and opportunity is a real core reason for my commitment to the center. Parenthetically, just to be really clear, because Trevor is a pretty competitive guy, all the nice things that I'm saying about Trevor, or have said, won't stop me from being relentlessly competitive with him on the golf course. No strokes. Kenji, more a little bit later. Thanks to the law school, now led by Troy, when I first explored Troy's background, his bankruptcy expertise, I sort of raised an eyebrow, and probably maybe some others' eyebrows. What I found, not surprisingly, was a highly regarded scholar and a commercial practitioner. Then I really thought to myself, who better than a bankruptcy practitioner, as far as I can tell, would do better at horse trading than Troy? And under his leadership, I'm certain that the law school will continue to be preeminent, innovative, substantive, ethical, and centered. I am not a guy, obviously, who's unaccustomed to public speaking, but this is different. And as Kenji sometimes says to me when I am more melancholy about it, he says, this is just the beginning. He immediately moves me to another area. I didn't ask for this, as Kenji and Trevor know well, but the both of them were very much unrelenting as to the renaming of the center. In my mind, Kenji's work is and has evolved to be the most important and sensible work in the area, and I've seen, obviously, a lot of it for a long, long time. The work lives and breathes through all of us. It's not slick consultant speak, and I've seen plenty of that too. It is intellectually uncompromising. It's, as I said before, grounded in social scientific research and provides a foundation for those who feel on the outside, almost like voyeurs, to secure a way in, to find mentors and allies, to help remove the mask, to discover and express their identity, and we all hope ultimately succeed. It's also a significant an unrelenting warning, and I think Frank alluded to this, to the profession and the wider commercial world beyond, using a cliched expression, to straighten up and fly right, or the battle for talent, the desire to practice or perform at the highest levels, as well. I think you both were kind of zeroing in on this, as well as the rule of law. Whether you're a smiter or you're not a smiter, depending on where it is, could be quite damaged. The center focuses on building frameworks that get well beyond a zero-sum game, while taking a more constructive approach to engage a broader range of people to include and ultimately find a place to belong. Now back to Kenji. He will be embarrassed, but I think in his heart of hearts, he wouldn't ever express it quite this way, but he's about as close to Olympus as anybody gets, folks. It is clearly a distinct honor to have this very uncommon relationship so comparatively late in my career. I mean, anybody who isn't inspired by what these two had to say, I mean, it's not only inspiring, it's almost breathtaking in a lot of ways. So I am forever grateful that we found this partnership, and we'll continue to push this as hard as we possibly can. So recently, Bill Russell, one of the giants of the NBA, passed away. As a New Yorker, obviously, there is nothing that I like less than the Celtics or Boston professional sports generally. Bill Russell was always different for me, and I think for a lot of other people. He often said the most important measure of how well he played was how much better he made his teammates play. That gave Russell immense pride and standing. This is the hallmark of the center and what Kenji does. The current commissioner of the NBA said Russell stood for something much bigger. Hang on one second. Much bigger than sports. He stood for the values of equality, respect, and inclusion, coming from Adam Silver. All of this applies not just to a single person, but tenfold to the center. I was and am very happy to be a role player in this journey forward and upward. As Russell said, I am a man. The work of the center underscores in bold relief what that meant: respect, equality, authenticity, and an empathic support, through allyship. That's why I did this. I did it to try and stop what I feel over a long period of time is the corrosive and polarizing divisions that we live with day in and day out. I further hope I've met Kenji's overriding standard, which they talk about in the book, which you all should get. The people, they say, the people we admire most are those that combine compassion and rigor, who have the softest of hearts and the hardest of heads. Half the equation I'm pretty sure I have met. The other half still very much a work in progress, not surprisingly. I want to thank the law school and the university. I very often shake my head about all of this when I think about now a very long time ago when I graduated. It seems undeserved, but nonetheless a watershed moment of recognition that will stay with me forever. Thanks again, and with that, I'll turn the program back to Troy.
I want to close with this small token for you, Roger, and I'll read it. Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging presented to Roger Meltzer, class of '77, on the occasion of the Meltzer Center launch celebration, October 17, 2022. We have a reception here. Please continue to talk, mingle, eat, and thank you so much for turning out for this evening. This was a wonderful evening, and as always, more to come. Good evening.